we will call to order the meeting of the Fire and Police Commission on November 11, 2023 at 4 p.m. Ms. Clerk, can we conduct roll call?
Commissioner Herlinger,
Present.
Commissioner Hill,
Present.
Commissioner Jones,
Aquí.
Vice Chair Dozer,
Here.
Chair Rodriguez.
Here. Ms. Clerk and Commissioners, are there any changes to the agenda?
There are no changes to the agenda.
Okay, we will now move to item number 5, general public comment. This is a time when we can hear from the public on items not on today's agenda. And as a reminder, we're no longer doing electronic participation, so public comment will be from folks in the room. Is there anyone that would like to make public comment on items not on today's agenda? Okie doke. Can we move, Ms. Clerk, to item number 6, overview, item number 5, approval of minutes from October 26th. Are there any changes to the October 26 minutes?
Chair Rodriguez, there are no changes.
Okay, do we have public comment for this item?
It's approval of meeting minutes from October 26, 2023.
Okay, do we have a motion from a commissioner to approve this?
So moved. Second.
Okay, we have a motion from Commissioner Hill and a second from Commissioner Herlinger. Any discussions or objections? Okie doke, we can move to item number 6, overview of crisis intervention training and co-response team program.
Chair Rodriguez, we will have to move to take a vote by name. So, Commissioner Herlinger,
Yes.
Commissioner Hill,
Yes.
Commissioner Jones,
Aye.
Vice Chair Dozer,
Yes.
Chair Rodriguez.
Yes.
Motion passes unanimously.
And as a reminder for the commission, can we remember to press the on button on your microphone so that folks who are watching on TV can hear your comments? Thank you.
Item number 6, overview of crisis intervention training and co-response team program.
And Dr. Lee, I'm just going to take a moment to introduce you. I know that most of our commissioners are familiar with you, as well as those who have joined us in the room and our colleagues that work with you. But I do want to introduce you to the audience that's watching today. So Dr. Lee is a police psychologist specializing in law enforcement operations and officer wellness. She has been a full-time employee with the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office since 2016. She currently manages the Behavioral Sciences Unit, which encompasses the Mental Health Co-Response Teams, Crisis Intervention Training, and Wellness Unit, which houses peer support. Dr. Lee also assists with threat assessment and management, serves on the crisis negotiation response teams for both the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office and the Santa Barbara Police Department, and teaches in the FBI 40-hour negotiation school. Dr. Lee, thank you so much for taking the time to join us this afternoon.
You're welcome. It's my pleasure. So, Chair Rodriguez, members of the commission, thank you for having me. It's my pleasure to be here. I will go ahead and move through the presentation. As was mentioned, just a little bit of background, a little bit of information about myself. I am a full-time employee at the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office. In the next slide, I will go into an org chart and talk about specifically. Thank you. And talk about specifically what it is the Behavioral Sciences Unit does within our agency. As was mentioned, I'm also a contracted provider with the Santa Barbara Police Department, and I am a member of the Crisis Negotiation Response Team. I do have a private practice through an organization called the Counseling Team International, where I see first responders exclusively and specialize in post-traumatic stress injury. I also do some contracted work with the Compassion Institute out of Stanford, which is a university program that provides mindfulness and compassion training for law enforcement personnel. I work with California Post on several different projects. So I am a subject matter expert on both officer and dispatcher wellness, as well as critical incidents, and am on their advisory board for a statewide grant that is aimed towards improving wellness for peace officers across the state.
I do a lot of writing, and so I'm a published author in various police magazines. I am on the California State Sheriff's Association Wellness Board, which addresses officer wellness from a state perspective. I am on the board for Doctors Without Walls, an organization that within the city of Santa Barbara provides paramedicine to folks who are underserved. And then I also teach for the FBI in their 40-hour negotiation school. I teach in the areas of mental health, resiliency, negotiations with suicidal persons as well. Okay, so this is what we call an org chart at the sheriff's office, and in many police agencies they have these. And so this is my unit, the Behavioral Sciences Unit. We are housed within the Criminal Investigations Division of the sheriff's office. There's quite a bit that we do within the unit. A lot of consultation, data collection, some of which I'll be reviewing today. And so I'm able to look at reports, and the sheriff's office is able to look at reports based on information we gather from dispatch and CAD about how many persons with mental health crises we're interacting with, in what regions, what the call types are, and I'll go over some of that data. Also do quite a bit of work with intel on threats cases. So these would be individuals who intend on committing targeted violence in our community, so active shooters, school shooters, that sort of a thing. I am on call all the time and available for consultation all the time. I'm a member of our crisis negotiation team, and the way that that works at the sheriff's office is when there is an exigent circumstance, there's an individual who poses a safety threat to themselves, the community, both, and there's some non-compliance, if you will, with the directives given by law enforcement. Our team gets activated, and we get activated every time our SWAT team gets activated. My role on the team is not to negotiate, but to gather information about the individual in crisis and pass that information on to the negotiators in an attempt to resolve the circumstance peacefully. And that is the same role that I play at the Santa Barbara Police Department, and I will go into further detail about that later. In our custody facilities, we have medication-assisted treatment programs for folks who are opioid addicted. I assist with that program. Mental health, our co-response teams, I will go into quite a bit more detail and further along the presentation. We also have our wellness team and peer support team, which helps address the internal stresses and traumas that law enforcement and civilian staff within our organization are navigating. And then we do a lot of training. And the training is mostly CIT, crisis intervention training, and that is also a major topic of my presentation today that I will be covering. So I always think it's just interesting, my journey in law enforcement. So I was working in drug treatment back in 2015 when I met a lieutenant at the sheriff's office who was interested in starting CIT. As a psychologist, part of our ethics code is to donate some of our time to the greater good. And I thought, sure, I would love to volunteer some time and help cultivate this training for law enforcement. And that turned into a part-time job and has now turned into a career and a passion and purpose in my life. And so I appreciate having been a part of this journey for some time. All right, so CIT training. CIT stands for Crisis Intervention Team. At the sheriff's office, we do offer 2 different types of training that are offered to all law enforcement within the county. There's an 8-hour CIT course, and there's also a 40-hour CIT academy. Both courses are post-certified, and so POST is sort of the oversight body at the state level for peace officers. And so there are stringent requirements in terms of who can teach, what their resumes are, what the content of the course is, and so on. And so both of the courses are post-certified as well as STC certified. So STC is the certification that our custody personnel need for their continuing education, if you will. So what is CIT designed to do? So generally speaking, CIT provides added training for law enforcement in the areas of mental health, substance abuse, crisis communication, and community resources for specialized populations. Why do I say added training? Because in the academies that our police officers go through, there is required training in the areas of mental health and substance use. What we do is we bring that information to life in the training that we offer, and we also drill down into the community-specific resources that are available here for folks within Santa Barbara. The courses are also designed to improve officers' awareness and understanding of behavioral health problems, including mental illness and substance use. Increase awareness of community resources. And so an example, well, I'll go into the class curriculum, but an example of what that looks like is part of our training day in the 40-hour academy, the officers will actually go to the psychiatric health facility, our PUF. They will go to the sobering center. They will go to the jails and see what the facilities, our behavioral health units look like. And so it's really a hands-on approach to training. Ultimately, part of the mission of CIT is to reduce the number of persons with mental illness that are staying in the jail. Improve officer safety and community safety. And then improve community relationships and partnerships. So one of the valuable pieces of the training that we have is we don't only invite law enforcement into the training, but we have our community partners, for example, through Good Samaritan, or through PATH, or through the Rescue Mission, Behavioral Wellness. We often have civilian personnel attend the class as well, because again, it's a very rich, dynamic training environment, and we can all learn from each other, which ultimately benefits the consumer that we're helping in the field. This is the calendar. I am going to go into each of these sections in more specificity, but ultimately it's a very comprehensive course that is 40 hours in length. On day one, we cover psychiatric disorders. The disorders that we cover are the folks that are most likely to engage with the criminal justice system. And so if you look at the Diagnostic and Statistical Manual, which is a very big book that has all of the lists of all of the mental illnesses, there are several hundreds. What we are covering in our class is the 5 or 6 that are most often engaging with the criminal justice system. We also cover de-escalation on day one, and so we cover what the definition is. There's a different definition that community has often when they think about this word that may not be the same definition that law enforcement have. And so one of the things that we do in the class on day one is sort of level set and operationally define what it is we're training and what it is we're talking about. Active listening, which is more difficult than one might think. It's a skill that has to be learned and honed and addressed, and it is a perishable skill. I know this because I have 2 young children, and so I'm tested constantly in this arena. But we do a lot of exercises that bring this information to life, and so the training isn't just a subject matter expert such as myself or other professionals coming in and talking at the group. It's really getting them up and utilizing the skills that I'm mentioning here. We also talk about crisis communication and then CIT, or crisis intervention tactics. So on day one, the instructors for the course are myself, and then we have 2 of our CIT trained deputies that work on our co-response team. And so we're covering together psychiatric disorders and de-escalation tactics. Generally speaking, I'll talk about the clinical aspect of, let's say, schizophrenia as an example, or bipolar disorder. And then the officer or the deputy is going to speak more specifically to the tactics and to the legal aspect of intervention, safety, and those sorts of things. Our 8-hour CIT class is essentially day one of the 40-hour class. And so the curriculum is the same. There is some adjusting to get all of the information in day one. But I'm also proud to say that several of the officers at Santa Barbara Police Department also co-teach this course with me. And so when we're teaching to Santa Barbara Police Department, and it's the 8-hour course, we'll have one of the CIT trained officers from Santa Barbara Police Department co-teach along with me, which has been a lot of fun. Okay, day 2. We are talking about substance use disorders, and we're talking about what information is needed for law enforcement personnel. So we're not going into detail in terms of medication or neuroanatomy, but real basic information about why people with mental health concerns use substances, what they look like, and what are some of the resources and ways that we can help people that have addiction issues. We have a criminal justice panel. This is a really dynamic component of the class where we have a judge who oversees mental health and veterans court come in, along with the district attorney that's assigned to diversion, public health, the public defender's office and their holistic defense team. We also have courts, county council, and Justice Alliance, which is an arm of behavioral wellness that assists with justice-involved persons. They sit on a panel. And for 5 or 10 minutes, they'll talk about what their agency is bringing to the table in terms of diversion, what they're seeing in terms of the clientele that we're talking about here today. And then there's an open forum for about an hour and a half where all the officers, the deputies, the civilian personnel can ask about the court process. So we learn about things like IST, incompetent to stand trial. So it's important for officers and deputies to have an understanding of the back end of the criminal justice system, because so much of their job, rightfully so, is just this much. And it's really helpful to have more of a comprehensive understanding, especially when it comes to mental illness, given the number of calls that they're engaging in on a daily basis. We will talk about suicide intervention and prevention. We will also talk about post-traumatic stress injury in public safety. And so what does it look like when our officers aren't okay? What are some mitigating techniques that we can advocate for that help with cumulative stress and incidental stress? And then what are the resources that exist locally and far for folks that are in imminent crisis themselves? On day 3, we will talk about threat assessment and mitigation. Again, this is related to targeted violence, so when people intend on committing acts of violence and work towards that end, which is different than effective violence. So effective violence is, you can think of it as sort of your road rage incident. Something happened, you're not happy about it, and emotions get high, and what we're talking about is when there is planning ahead of an event. So that's what we talk about in the course. We have our NAMI panel, the National Alliance of Mental Illness, that come in on that day. We have persons with lived experience that are actively experiencing things like schizophrenia, schizoaffective disorder, bipolar, that have been through our criminal justice system. And they talk from the perspective of the consumer. So what is it like to live with these illnesses? What is it like on a bad day? What is it like on a good day? And what was their experience when they were in custody with us or when they were in county facilities? What is really exciting about this panel is that on Wednesday, which is day 3, we have a catered lunch. And so for all of the officers and deputies, it's a working lunch. And they shall sit down and mingle with the NAMI folks who stay and enjoy lunch with us. Because often, and rightfully so, the officers are called on somebody's worst day. We also want them to see them on somebody's good day. Because again, that helps with just an overall comprehensive understanding of what they're navigating. There it is, working lunch. We have folks from behavioral wellness come in, and I'll talk about who comes in and talks about all this stuff. It's not just me. And they'll talk about the mental health crisis system. So we'll talk about mobile crisis, and we'll have an opportunity to roundtable with the deputies and the officers about that system. We also have our mental health lead at WellPath, who's our contracted medical and mental health provider at the jail, come in and answer questions and problem solve. One of the items that we enacted over in our custody facility as a result of one of these classes is something called the mental health evaluation form, which allows for when there's an arrest made and the individual being arrested has evidenced or expressed some kind of mental health concern, crisis, behavior. What the officer can do is mark that on a form that goes directly to WellPath. And so we expedite the opportunity for WellPath to come and talk with that person, stabilize them on medication, have a conversation, and so on, which is a better process than we had had previously. And so those are some of the outcomes that come out of this collective course. And then we have military and veterans. So we have a gentleman who comes into our class who attempted suicide by cop with us several years ago. Suicide by cop is when there's an individual who wants to die, but they don't want to commit suicide themselves, and so they force law enforcement's hand by threatening law enforcement's life. He had made that attempt, and there was something that the deputy had said in the midst of the crisis that allowed this gentleman to calm down and recognize he did not want to die that day. He went through our custody facility, he went through Veterans Treatment Court. He now has a house in North County for veterans who are in crisis, and we work with him quite a bit. He's several years removed from his incident, if you will, but he talks about the perspective that he had and what was helpful, a really powerful component of the course. On day 4, we'll talk about gun violence restraining orders. We have our co-response teams come in and talk about when they get deployed, why they get deployed, answer questions, review body cam, and sort of process what these teams are bringing to the law enforcement community. We have presentations on childhood psychiatric disorders because our teams and our deputies do engage with juveniles often, which is unfortunate. But in particular with mental health, we're seeing a huge increase in the number of kids that aren't okay. And so we have a separate block for that. And then we have our site visits. And so we will take the entire class and we will go to South County Crisis Services, which is the behavioral wellness campus. They will walk through the crisis stabilization unit. They will walk through the psychiatric health facility, or the PUF, as well as the South County Jail, and then our sobering center as well. This allows them to be more familiar with the resources if they haven't worked in South County, if we're talking about the sheriff's office, for example, or they don't always get out to the county facilities because they're within the police department and stay within the city limits. This reduces barriers for diversion in the future. All right, and our final day, we talk about psychiatric medications and care, developmental disabilities, PTSI and law enforcement and building resiliency. And then we have scenarios. And so the scenarios are where we bring in actors that play the part of an individual in a mental health crisis. And during the scenario, there are 2 evaluators. There's a law enforcement evaluator, and then there's a clinician. The law enforcement evaluator is looking at tactics. Did you recognize that there was a knife over here? Were you safe? Were you communicating effectively? Were you in line with policy and procedure based on your agency? And then we'll have the clinician evaluate, are you using the de-escalation tools and tactics and the information that was taught throughout the week as the scenarios are ongoing? And these are all of the participating agencies that help us make this program successful. Outside of just regular straight time for folks that are already employed by the various organizations, everybody that comes into this training donates their time. And it's been really a blessing to see this program start and to see where we have come today. So as I've mentioned, our criminal justice panel, I failed to mention probation initially. They're also a part of that. Marion Hospital, the ER director will come in and talk about psychiatric medications. The individual who's presenting on suicide intervention and prevention is a UC Santa Barbara psychiatrist, and so on. So we have a really dynamic group of instructors that bring a lot of different experience to the table for our officers. Okay, I'm a quotes person, and so I will read one of these so as to not put everybody to sleep. But these are some, I'll read 2. These are some quotes that officers and civilian personnel have given to us anonymously at the conclusion of the class. And so what we try to do every class is get really good feedback so that we can improve every time. We're making adjustments every time. So the first is from a civilian participant. This is an impressive training that all law enforcement and crisis staff should attend. The difference between criminal and clinical can be vast, depending. Seeing and hearing law enforcement concerns and interactions gave new perspective on how clinicians can communicate in a collaborative way, as well as recognize the difficult situation officers may face. That's how we get better, folks, is understanding each other's disciplines and working towards the shared goal of keeping the community safe and a community healthy. And then the second quote, the training was very well organized and thorough. The presenters cared about our success and our goal to effectively serve the community. That's what we want, an engaged and appreciative class. No, they don't pay me for writing good quotes, or I don't pay them for writing good quotes. Okay. A little bit more on the training specific to Santa Barbara Police Department. All of the sworn personnel within Santa Barbara Police Department have received at least the 8-hour training. Approximately 25 to 35 have received the 40-hour training. At the Sheriff's Office, we offer a certain number of spots at no cost to each of the policing agencies, and I'm happy to say that in every 40-hour course, Santa Barbara Police Department has participated. And as I mentioned earlier, many of the officers participate in the training blocks. Okay. All right, ready for a pivot, and we'll talk about co-response. So co-response pairs a CIT trained, now you know CIT training is, deputies from the Santa Barbara Sheriff's Office with a licensed mental health clinician from our county behavioral wellness. Essentially, there are three primary missions that these teams have. The first is to respond to mental health crises coming through 911. The second is to proactively engage with individuals who might be sub-crisis but need some support, and so we try to meet with them and assist them before there's a 911 call. And then follow-up. So once somebody has been acutely hospitalized or even arrested or safety planned, our team, depending on the circumstances, will follow up with that person. Are you stable on your medication? Do you need assistance getting to your appointments? What else can we do for you? And so on. So when we say mental health crisis call, what does that mean? Essentially, it's somebody that's in crisis, somebody that's not able to manage their own, thoughts, feelings, and behaviors, and that crisis is related to or originates from a mental health symptom or diagnosis. And so you don't have to have a mental health diagnosis to be suicidal, for example. So this team will work with folks with and without mental illnesses, but essentially those that are in need of our support because they can't manage themselves. How many mental health crisis calls do you think the sheriff's office navigates per month? How
many teams do you have?
We have 3, soon to be 4.
That's for the whole county.
Yes, sir. 60, 20? I should have put money down. Okay. A lot.
Considerably more.
A lot more than that. So almost 500. A month, yes, ma'am, a month. And that's not just what the co-response teams are doing. That's what patrol is navigating as well as the co-response team. So that's comprehensive of the entire patrol division. And on average, there's about 15 mental health crises throughout the county on any given day.
Wait, is that you get called to or that you respond to?
Get called to.
How many of those do you respond to?
All of them? Yeah. And so that's a great nuanced question that I'm happy to answer more elaborately, but generally speaking, all of them. There are a few exceptions, and I'm happy to elaborate on what one of those exceptions might be now, if you'd like, or I can elaborate later. Sure. Now? Okay. There are a few folks in our community who have what we would call a delusional disorder, when their reality is much different than the reality that is objective. And oftentimes, an example would be there are folks who believe there are lasers coming into their windows, through the floors, through the ceilings, they're hurting them, and please make it stop. These folks are absolutely suffering, and there is no medication that makes delusional disorder go away. It reduces the agitation, but medication is voluntary unless you're involved in a court process. And so we at the sheriff's office have had one individual call 911 over 900 times in a 13-month period. Twice, there was a law enforcement issue. The other times there were not. But if she's fearful somebody's in her bushes and trying to enter her house, we have to respond. There are occasions when we have dispositioned that individual over the phone, calmed her down, and we're able to ascertain, and by we, I mean the dispatchers, were able to ascertain enough information that allowed them to disposition the call over the phone. But outside of that, we're going to that call. Okay.
So I have a question related to that.
Can we hold questions until then?
Sure. All right. Go ahead.
This is very small, but what this is it shows you the number of mental health crisis calls per month that the sheriff's office gets. So this is an automatic report that we get from our CAD system. And so this is just a snapshot. It is also broken up by city. We can look at how many man hours are spent on calls, what time of day they're coming in, and so on. But this shows all calls at the top, and then it shows the number of calls handled by a CIT team. Our CIT teams also assist with patrol functions when needed. So if they're the closest unit and there's a domestic violence issue happening or a fire breaks out, they're going to have to respond to that. And so we wanted to accurately capture the work that they're doing, both on the law enforcement and the co-response or CIT side of the house. Why co-response? Well, it's a nationally recognized best practice. We did not come up with the idea, although we ensured that idea had feet in Santa Barbara County. Los Angeles, San Diego, they have had co-response teams for over a decade. San Luis Obispo has a co-response team now, so does, I believe, Simi Valley Police Department, or they have their officer, they're waiting for their clinician. And so it is becoming well sought out, valuable, evidence-based, successful trend in the law enforcement community, not just in California, but nationwide. On average, it takes patrol maybe 122 minutes to disposition a mental health crisis call. And what we're showing is for our CIT units, it's between 20 and 60 minutes. And so we're spending a lot less time on these calls. And so generally speaking, without our co-response teams, our officers and deputies are on scene for a much longer period of time with individuals who are in need of imminent, immediate care. And Santa Barbara County is the only county at present where law enforcement are not writing 5150 holds. Why is there an asterisk there? Because as of February of 2023, the Sheriff's Office entered into a pilot program with the Department of Behavioral Wellness, and the deputies that work co-response are trained and authorized to write holds under particular circumstances. That is why there is the asterisk there. What is the difference between a deputy and a co-response deputy? And just for the room, this was one of my learning points early on, but deputies wear tan and green, and they're at the sheriff's office. Officers wear blue, and they're at the police department. So sometimes the words can be used interchangeably. So they're dressed down. So at the sheriff's office, they're not in full uniform. They are identified and have all their tools. They're in an unmarked vehicle. So it does say sheriff on the vehicle, but it's not a black and white beat car. It's not something that you would automatically recognize as being a police vehicle. They do not make arrests themselves. So let's say that a co-response team is on scene of somebody in a mental health crisis, but there was a crime that occurred and that individual needs to be dispositioned to jail. The co-response team will call in patrol to make the arrest. Because we recognize that our team is going to need to and want to continue to build rapport with that individual. And so we try to maintain that relationship by not affecting the arrests ourselves. Specialized relationships with mental health. Our deputies are in the mental health clinics with mobile crisis. They just have special relationships because of they're in the car together all the time. And specialized relationships with community partners as well. So we've done quite a bit of de-escalation training for different communities in the last year or so. So just recently we had the honor of doing de-escalation training for the zoo, which was a lot of fun. PATH, the Rescue Mission, Olive, Good Samaritan, Calm. There are a lot of folks who are in want and need of this kind of training. And so getting the officers and deputies out there, again, builds that relationship, which pays dividends for the community member we're tasked with serving. Okay, this is data. So I will call your attention to a couple of points on the slides. So when we started, when we being the Sheriff's Office started our co-response program in 2018, it was a pilot program, and we then moved to grant funding. Attached to the grant funding was a requirement to contract with a third-party evaluator that would take all of our raw data, so all of the raw jail data, all of the raw CAD or dispatch data, and all of the treatment data Behavioral Wellness gave them de-identified, and they would tell us a story. And so these are their slides. The organization that we contracted with was called Social Finance. They were phenomenal and have been with us since the grant started in 2020. What this shows is the number of calls and percentages of calls our co-response teams navigate in relation to patrol when it comes to mental health. It'll also show you the changes in pattern over time, over years and months in terms of the volume of calls. This slide shows us on what day and what time of day we're receiving the mental health calls. This is how the teams get staffed and positioned. So we're using data-driven information to determine when the teams are going to be working. And so this is that data. The yellow bars are showing you when the co-response teams are operational and when they're engaging in the calls. And then blue is patrol. So if I can bring your attention to the slide that would be on my right, what you'll see is that when co-response is off-duty, around 1800, we still have a high number of mental health crisis calls. And so we are going to be onboarding a fourth team here next month. When we do, they're going to work a staggered schedule so that we have a team on duty when those calls are coming in. Another point, as you can see, that I need better glasses, 40%, more than 40% of individuals who we would say are suicidal callers those calls are coming in after the team has left for the day. And so those individuals deserve the same support that we can provide during daytime hours. If I can bring your attention to the bar graph on my left that says suicidal subject, what this shows is a breakout in terms of resources when we compare patrol with our co-response team. So when we have a suicidal subject call type and co-response is responding to that call type, on average there's 1 unit, which means the 1 car, and it takes on average 66 minutes to disposition, so from beginning to end. When we have patrol, on that very same call types, you'll look at the dark blue bar, on average we're sending 3 units, and on average for that call type it's 78 minutes from start to finish. And then in the middle you'll see when there's both patrol and co-response on scene working a call together. This is an outcome slide. And there's a lot of words, and I apologize for that, but they're not my slides, so I wanted to just keep them intact as they were given to me. And so what this shows you is what happens with the individuals that we're working with. So on my left, you'll see 911 calls. So those are the active in progress calls that we get coming into our system. 40% of the individuals that come to us through 911 were dispositioned to a 5150 or the juvenile version of a 5150, which is 5585. About 43% were sheltered or remained in their home or community. Another way that we might explain that is they were safety planned. They were de-escalated. They were able to stay at home. We talked about following up with a clinician or some such thing the next day. 13% of the group went voluntarily to the hospital. So per the 5150 WIC code, least restrictive means are needing to be offered to the client. And so folks have an opportunity for the most part, to go voluntarily, and sometimes, depending on the circumstances, if they don't go voluntarily to the hospital and we feel strongly enough they need that help, a 5150 will be written. And then about 4% of the 911 calls dispositioned to an arrest. When an arrest is made, we are immediately contacting our WellPath partners and giving them the information about what happened in the field so that when that person comes into custody, they have the information needed to provide the best care that they can once they're in their hands. On my right, you'll see the proactive or follow-up calls. So those are the other 2 call types our teams respond to, and you can see the same breakout. So 94% of those individuals whom we're following up with are dispositioned home or are able to remain in the community. Less than 0.5% end up in arrest. 3% are voluntarily taken to the hospital, and 2% are taken on a psychiatric detention. Here is some demographic information. And so one of the resources that social finance used to make this report is the data that our behavioral wellness clinicians enter into a program called Vertical Change. It's basically their EHR, electronic health record. So what you can see is that based on the time that we're looking at, so we're looking at 800 individuals specifically between January 2020 and October 2022. The average age was 39. 12% of the 800 individuals had interacted with behavioral wellness before the age of 18. So some of these folks have been known to our county systems for a while. 63% identified as white, 56% identified as male, 75% have a permanent residence, 26% had at least 1 arrest in a 24-month period. So that would be 12 months prior to the co-response contact and 12 months after the co-response contact. So within 2 years, 26% had an arrest. 57% had a behavioral wellness service history. So what that means is that 57% of the individuals that we interacted with had established services with behavioral wellness at one point in time. Sometimes it was concurrent, they were concurrently receiving services, and other times they had been receiving services previously and we wanted to re-engage them. Most of the individuals encountered by the teams are encountered once. Some of the individuals are encountered multiple times. So what this slide will show you is that after a co-response encounter, the percentage of individuals experiencing a new booking into custody declines. And so we're seeing some patterns in that when there's a co-response contact, the cohort, the 800 people that we're looking at the data for, were less likely to be booked after the co-response contacts. There was a lower percentage. And what you'll see here is sort of the converse to that. There's an increase in treatment utilized after the co-response contact. So this is how does the cohort interact with behavioral wellness services? What it shows is that after the contact, there's continued engagement. And there's continued engagement not just on the crisis side, so not just on involuntary holds, but on the outpatient side, non-crisis services. So following up with treatment, following up with medication, engaging in groups, and so on. And so that was our hypothesis, that we would see less jail and more treatment. Really glad to see that our evaluators were able to confirm that for us. And then again, you can see just another way to talk about sort of the same teeter-totter balancing act. In terms of behavioral wellness services, there are a whole lot more minutes that behavioral wellness is interacting with these clients after the co-response contact. And again, we're seeing the biggest increase in non-crisis services. And this is a graph that shows the percentage of individuals interacting with co-response by encounter. So just again, most individuals that we're seeing, we contact one time. We have data generally for 12 months after the co-response contact, so that's the time frame that we're evaluating under. Okay, I have 2 more slides for you. This is one of them. So another hard pivot. I am happy and proud and blessed and honored to be a member of the Santa Barbara Police Department's crisis negotiation team, crisis negotiation response team. And so when there is an exigent circumstance, there is somebody that we need to be negotiating with or communicating with, our team gets deployed. And I assist in gathering information, listening to the individual in crisis, assessing behavior, attitude, communicating with command staff, communicating with the negotiators in terms of what I'm hearing, what I'm seeing, and what might be of benefit to help calm the situation down. And so that might be contacting hospitals, family, and so on. And so I am right there in the van with these guys and gals that are doing the hard work. I usually bring candy, so they keep letting me come back. And then finally, that's our newest recruit. He's Theo. He's 3. That's my son. Yeah, on behalf of my family, I just wanted to thank you for the opportunity to be here and to present. And by family, I mean my home family, my little guy, and my police family as well. So I want to thank all the officers for their service, and I want to thank you for your support with them. And that's my presentation.
Thank you, Dr. Lee. Before we get to questions, I just want to ask Chief Gordon to step up and share a few thoughts specific to our co-response team at the Santa Barbara Police Department and introduce our co-response team officers.
So good afternoon or evening, whatever you want to consider it at this point, Commission. I want to just take a moment, to thank Dr. Lee. She's a vital part of our team, our training, our co-response, how it's been developed, as well as, what we do in terms of crisis negotiation. So a big thank you to her and her support and her training. It's that partnership that allows us to be better. We can smile and laugh about it, but we have great conversations about how we can be better, and we challenge each other, which is something that I appreciate, because that's how we learn and that's how we grow. In terms of, the statistics, because I have a feeling you are all going to ask me that question, we don't have the same fancy statistics that the county does. They had the benefit of having that outside agency come in and do that, so we don't have the same because we have, and you're going to get introduced to our clinician, we don't have the same ability at this time to do that. So we have to track things a little differently. I can tell you what we see is in alignment with what they see. I can tell you that our, and we have, less teams and we only have one clinician. I'll explain that piece in a second, but just in the last year, our co-response has handled over 300 calls. So that's not even what patrol is handling. And we're getting better about how we're tracking our data, what data we're tracking, but we don't have access the same way because we don't have access to the same behavioral health. So we can't make the same comparisons. So I just want to lay that expectation for everyone before you ask the question. And in anticipation of that, I would love to have all the same data. I can tell you, I've been in law enforcement going on 28 years and came from LA County. So I have had the pleasure of working with co-response for a long time. When Dr. Lee talked about, LA County's been doing it for over a decade, I've been part of that in 2 different agencies and worked with multiple clinicians. So I'm a big proponent of co-response because I think when we work together for the betterment of our community, the service that those that are experiencing some sort of crisis is that much better. It allows the amount of time that it takes for them to get help less. And that's what we're here for. I can't think of anyone that, for the most part, I would say probably most of us, even in just this small room, have some sort of direct connection to mental health and having a family member who's been in crisis or knows how that affects a family. It's something I'm very passionate about because it not just only affects our community, but it affects officers. And I think that's something we forget is that a lot of us have our own personal experience that outside the uniform with that as well. So currently we have 2 co-response teams, but 1 clinician. We've had a co-response team for a bit of time now. The original officer was Officer Clark, who has been out on injury. So with that, we brought on a second officer in hopes of getting a second clinician from Be Well. And then we also brought in to backfill for the officer who's out on injury. So when Officer Clark comes back, we will have 3 officers, even if we don't get to the point of having 3 clinicians, but their expertise in what they bring and how they can assist patrol is going to be very valuable because it'll allow us to have that expertise more hours of the day and more days of the week. So currently, we have 1 clinician who you're going to get to meet from Be Well, and our hope is, and we've been discussing with Director Navarro, is getting a second clinician hopefully in the near future. And I'm going to also head off, probably the next question is going to be, she mentioned the pilot program with the county with writing 5150 holds. I came from a county where we write holds and wrote holds my whole career. That's just something a little different here. But we've been in conversation with Director Navarro as well as Cottage Hospital, and we are almost there where we should be piloting with our co-response team by the first of the year. We've had very good conversations and meetings, and we're just to the last component of actually getting the training for our co-response teams and then being able to pilot that by the first of the year. So that's a big step for us. And just a note on that, officers actually receive training all the way back in the academy. It's actually a learning domain that you learn about in the academy about mental health and holds. And there are some certain things that officers can do that clinicians cannot, especially when it comes to red flag laws, weapons, gun violence, being able to remove weapons from the home. Those are other things that officers can do that clinicians cannot, which is another piece of why that, for me, that co-response is so important. Because there are other areas that it allows us to address. And the whole goal is not to, criminalize or send someone to jail who doesn't need to go to jail and who needs mental health help. Sometimes it's unavoidable and those things have to happen, but the goal is to minimize the amount of time and amount of times that someone is being placed into custody criminally versus receiving the necessary mental health treatment. So without further ado, I'm going to have each of them come up and they're going to introduce themselves. I promised they wouldn't have to speak much, but they do have to introduce themselves. So I'm going to have them come on up. You're first up. You came up first.
Well, good evening. I think it's about evening time. My name is Rocio Lopez, and I am a co-response officer with the Santa Barbara Police Department. As a co-response officer, I get to work alongside my partners here, Officer Diepenthaler and Behavior Wellness Clinician Rosa Cepeda. We've been working together since September of this year, and in this partnership, we're able to combine our strengths and help people in mental health-related crises. Rosa Cepeda actually typed up a little something for me to share on behalf of her. She lost her voice. She legitimately cannot speak. She's been whispering this whole day. So she typed something up in prep for this, so I'm just going to read it on her behalf. My name is Rosa Cepeda. I am a marriage and family therapist and work with Santa Barbara County Department of Behavioral Wellness. I have worked with the department since 2015 in crisis services. I am the co-response clinician and have been working in this role since April of 2021. I believe that the mission of co-response is to have those in helping profession like me whose training, education, and experience involves collaborating with SBPD with managing the vulnerability of our society. As a mental health clinician, my job does not only consist of writing 5150s and getting people immediate psychiatric treatment, but it is to provide psychoeducation to families and friends and empowering them to maintain or establish healthy boundaries with those who struggle with mental health and substance abuse ideas. We do proactive engagements with not just clients, family, and friends, and offer support and encouragement so that they can make the most difficult decisions regarding their loved ones who may not be ready for help. We offer a non-judgmental approach to those situations and cheer families, friends, and clients on when they take those difficult steps to change and set boundaries. And now this is my partner, Officer Deepan Thaler.
Hi, my name is Thomas Diefenthaler. I've been with the department since 2016, about 7 years. I'm very excited to be working in this capacity. The thing I think is very exciting about co-response is we can essentially attempt to get out in front of the crisis before it even happens through frequent welfare checks on people. We can kind of become their support system if people are lacking a support system. Because whether you have mental illness or not, we all go through hard times, and I think it's a very, very exciting thing that we're able to do that.
Come on back, Gordon.
They're learning. I'm nice today. This is their one freebie if they get it. So
Can we
we'll
have some
take their
questions at this
questions,
point?
but
Yes, go ahead, Chair Rodriguez, thanks.
All righty, do we have questions from the commissioners?
Yes, I was wondering if we get some questions for Chief Gordon first, but these are simpler questions. I'm trying to get my mind around a lot of data, and does the sheriff's co-response teams operate inside the city, or is it just the city's police co-response teams that operate inside the city?
if we have a situation that comes up and we don't have a co-response team that is Santa Barbara PD, but we feel like we need one, then we call and request. If they have one, they will respond for us. It's what we call in law enforcement mutual aid.
Okay.
So they are very gracious, and if we have a need and they have a team on, and it works both ways. They call and request from us as well if they don't have one. But typically here in the city, you will get a City of Santa Barbara co-response team.
So help me understand. So let's assume that it's 11 o'clock at night and a call comes into 911 from someone saying that their father seems to be despondent, upset in the garage and has a gun, and they're worried about his safety. Where does that go?
That call comes into 911, and in that case, typically we don't have co-response that late at night. Our patrol officers will respond. And that's that piece where that critical incident training piece, that crisis intervention training comes into play. A lot of times our officers are able to de-escalate the situation and handle that situation. In that case, then we would wait for a mobile crisis response team from Be Well if we feel that person needs mental health crisis intervention. So the downside of that is then we often wait an hour to 2 hours for the mobile crisis response from the county to respond, which is really hard on the person that's in crisis. That is the benefit of co-response, is we're trying to cut down the amount of time that it really takes for them to get that help. Like in the case where, say that same call happened at 11 in the morning and our co-response responds, then, yes, the officers make sure the scene's safe for the clinician and that piece of it, and they work together, but then that clinician and that mental health support is immediately available. So, but at 11 o'clock at night, that typically is our patrol officers. And let me give you just one kind of real life, it's not even anecdotal, it happened earlier this week. Sometimes they're not 911 calls, they're just things that happen. So we had an officer who's a field training officer and his trainee just canvassing for video, out on a call for not even related to a call for service in that moment, but trying to find some video related to another call. They're at a door, they're speaking to a person, they have one of those, screens that have the magnet, and the particular person they're speaking to had an injury and is leaning on a walker, and a subject comes up behind, comes over the shoulder and points a handgun directly at the officer that was standing in front of him. The person that was on the walker grabbed the hand, but our officers did not overreact. Our officers did not end up in an officer-involved shooting. Our officers, ultimately, the person was taken into custody and everything was safe. But I give you that because, A, it's my job to highlight the good work that the officers are doing, and everyone should be aware of that, especially all of you as our fire and police commissioners. But the other side of that is that comes from the training, that comes from the things that Dr. Lee was talking about, and all those pieces of it that we're able to, as officers, evaluate that piece. So, yes, we like to work and have the clinician available with us as much as possible. The amount of additional training and the threat assessment and the other piece is really big, because a lot of what our co-response team has been doing lately has been related to threat assessment and other pieces. And that is another piece. It's not that, in the moment piece. But I just share that because I want all of you as commissioners, as we, get into this and talk about the different things, really have an understanding of what's happening.
Thank you. I mean, that's, an officer who deserves an accommodation, it seems to me.
Absolutely.
How many hours during the day is the police's co-response team available?
Typically, there's about 10 hours during the day that they're available.
Okay. And the constraints that you see to being able to have more co-response teams, because it seems the one thing that I get from all of this is how valuable they are and how it would be nice to have more of them. So the constraints are what? Budgetary? Capacity?
Budgetary and more clinicians. So it's the availability of clinicians that have the skill set to work in that type of crisis situation from Be Well. And that's a
Okay.
challenge because that is a particular skill set that we're fortunate to have a very skilled clinician. But, a lot of clinicians, this type of work is not something that they want to do. They came in with we sit in a different environment and work with those that have that. So it also takes a special skill set and special clinicians to do this kind of work. So, and I also want to recognize that because what they bring to the table is really special. So I want to, it's not something that every clinician can do, or do they choose to do.
Now, last question, and you can duck it. If, you've come from service where a 5150 is an authorized empowerment of the police department, and of course the welfare code permits that. Do you have a view of first, do you have a view of whether you are in fact prohibited from 5150s, and do you have a view of whether or not it would be wise for you to have that power?
So the Welfare and Institutions Code is very clear. An officer has that power.
Yep.
And I will leave it at that. So we have that. We've been working cooperatively with the county to change the way in which we do business here, and we're being very successful in that. Whenever there's change, there's, that intrepidation of what that looks like, and it's our job to talk through those fears, even with emergency room staff and other people that don't know what that looks like, that they think that that's just going to, cause this huge influx into the emergency room and those other pieces as well. So I'm very cognizant of that, and we're working through this very methodically. And like I said, I'm very encouraged by all my conversations with Dr. Navarro and working with Cottage Hospital, and everyone has been working in the same direction. So like I said, I'm very hopeful that by the first of the year, our co-response teams will be in that position.
And I think other people, I'm sure, have questions, so I'll back off for a second and let some other people work.
So I think it might be helpful if we separate the questions first, addressing co-response questions, and then after we can address 5150 questions if there are more. Are there any other questions from the commissioners about co-response and crisis intervention training?
Yes.
Could we get a copy of the slide presentation? Thank you.
Chief, I'm just curious. We have one team, and the Sheriff's Department has 4. Does Santa Maria PD have anyone, if you know?
I believe they do. I couldn't tell you how many they have.
That's okay. Does Lompoc have one?
No, they're working on a model.
And I assume Guadalupe doesn't have one.
Correct.
Okay, so the Sheriff's Department has 4 and 5 with Santa Maria, and the PD has 1. And has this team been in place for how long? Let me rephrase that.
Ours has only been in place for a couple of years.
Okay,
So, and we came into place, correct me if I'm wrong, Assistant Chief Arroyo, 2020.
okay, and how long has the sheriffs had theirs in place?
Sorry, let me move this so you don't. So at the sheriff's office, we started our pilot program for co-response in 2018, and we had 1 deputy and 1 clinician 1 day every other week, and that's how it started. And then Patrol liked the program so much that they were willing to go 1 short on patrol in our Goleta area to have a full-time pilot. And so we had a full-time pilot for about 6 months, and then in 2019, we were able to secure grant funding for 2 teams. At the same time, the Public Defender's Office also got a grant, and they funded our 3rd team. Because in partnership with Behavioral Wellness and the Sheriff's Office, really, as we're all starting to talk about diversion and what that looks like for this population, the Public Defender's Office believed that the best opportunity is before somebody goes to jail. And so they funded the 3rd team for us. Those 2 grants sunsetted at December of last year. And so the 3 teams right now at the Sheriff's Office are funded with ARPA funds through the Board of Supervisors. The 4th team, which will be hopefully live in December, is being funded by the CCP, or Community Corrections Partnership.
Are any of those funds available to the city of Santa Barbara for funding for teams here? If you know, and that's okay if you don't.
I don't know.
Okay.
So part of what we're doing to fund the 2nd co-response team is related to the same ARPA funding but in terms of the city. That move was voted on and approved by council prior to my arrival. We've just taken us a little bit of time to get to the point where we could even just take 1 additional officer out of patrol, and now we're just working on the clinician piece.
Mutual aid is a wonderful thing, as we all know. Is it sufficient in this case?
I think for us, the more coverage that we can get in Santa Barbara, and, it's great to have North County teams, but yeah, as we know, it's all about the time of response. So sometimes,
Sure.
if that's what you got, that's what you got. So for us, I'd like to see how it works, actually getting 2 full-time teams up and running, and then evaluating what our future needs are from there. Because I do think there's a possibility that a 3rd team here in the city, just because we have a large number of these calls that we're dealing with, and if we can take that pressure off patrol and have the specialized teams with the clinicians, responding, there's a big benefit to that. But like I said, I want to get both teams up and running and then evaluate whether we have a need for a 3rd clinician.
Have you at all run into circumstances when mutual aid through these teams was not available for a call in Santa Barbara, and you've just pivoted to use your trained officers?
Yes.
Thank you.
Any other questions from commissioners? Okay, I have a whole bunch, so I'm going to try to narrow it down. Are fire personnel trained in CIT? And Dr. Lee, can I ask that you use the mic so folks listening on TV can hear?
Absolutely. My understanding is the fire departments do not have CIT training. If they do, it is not through the sheriff's office. There was a brief conversation about that a couple years ago, but nothing has materialized that I've been aware of.
Would it be possible for fire personnel to be trained in CIT?
Everything is possible.
Yeah.
Logistically, what that would look like and what the utility might be, it might be a different kind of training. Given the expertise and the role that fire plays in emergencies, it's different than the expertise and the role that law enforcement plays. And so it would be a different type of training, also to meet the requirements that fire has for their continuing education. But a version of CIT, absolutely.
Could you invite commissioners to attend the 8-hour training?
Yes, ma'am.
Great. What is the difference between the service of a patrol call versus a co-response call?
So in terms of what the deputy or officer does on scene, generally speaking, the main difference is the immediacy of the resource. And patrol is tied to the radio. What that means is they're listening to all the other calls coming in their jurisdiction that they're responsible for. And so there's an immediacy to disposition the call in front of them because there's a robbery, there's somebody else who needs help, there's X, Y, or Z. In co-response, they have a little bit more latitude. They're not tied to the radio in the same way that patrol is, and so they can spend more time on the call. They have that clinician immediately there, so they're not needing to wait for time that we can't always get back. And then the clinician often has access to resources that are immediate, that when patrol utilizes mobile crisis, those resources are not necessarily available. And in addition to all of the other items that I listed in terms of how they're dressed different and the cars are different.
Thank you for that. Well, first of all, I forgot to say thank you for that, whoa, just brain dump of a presentation. That's a lot. I'm gonna watch it again because it's just a lot of really good information and very, very well explained. So common folks like us can understand. So thank you for that.
You're welcome.
What could you do, and this question is for Chief Gordon, what could you do with 3 fully staffed teams? So 3 officers plus 3 clinicians. How would that affect your level of service?
It would allow us to have more coverage, more hours of the day. It wouldn't be about having 2 clinicians on at one time, and 2 teams on at one time. It would be, how do we get, to Dr. Lee's point, having a clinician at 10 or 11 o'clock at night?
Yeah.
You know, the 2 o'clock or 3 o'clock in the morning calls, you know, we don't get as many of those typically, you know, and typically when we do get those, you know, those tend to be really in need of an officer anyways, because they tend to be pretty aggravated. And a lot of times there's alcohol and other things involved in those type of incidents. But if we could get where we had a clinician until, you know, 10 or 11 at night, or even midnight, along with an officer for co-response, that would make a big difference in terms of how we're able to respond to these type of calls in the community.
So today, was it today or yesterday, Nick Welsh wrote a wonderful supportive article about co-response and 5150, and he mentioned, there was a brief mention about funding restrictions for co-response teams. And I'm wondering if that would be prohibitive for City of Santa Barbara to have 3 teams. And then my follow-up question to that is, if so, is this a program that would qualify for the county fires ambulance revenue?
So let me start with the first part. I believe what Nick Welch was referring to is the Medi-Cal mobile crisis benefit. And that's a specific state mandate that each Department of Behavioral Health has to have some sort of mobile crisis benefit team. And it's very defined in the directive as to what has to be on that team. And they have to be able to directly respond to calls. So someone has to be able to call a number and have this team come out. Now, nothing in that actually prohibits law enforcement being part of it, but if law enforcement is part of it, the team still has to have, there's it has to be 2 members. There are certain dynamics that have to exist. The state's feeling is they would like to see less law enforcement and more clinicians. And I understand that point, but it actually doesn't prohibit law enforcement from being involved. It just lays out what has to be part of that mobile crisis benefit in order to be eligible for Medi-Cal funding back from the state. So it does not prohibit co-response. It doesn't prohibit any type of this. We've all been working together, collaborating to figure out what that's going to be in Santa Barbara County. I know Dr. Lee's been on several calls. We've been on several calls. We're working towards what that model is going to look like here in the county. But like I said, that has to do with Medi-Cal reimbursement specifically. And yes, we know that there is probably, I'm going to take a wild stab, probably a 60% of those that we see that fall within that Medi-Cal, but not everyone does either. And that has to do specifically with the Medi-Cal reimbursement piece. And there's nothing in it that prohibits law enforcement from being part of it. It just states what the team has to be made of minimally, whether law enforcement is part of it or not. It doesn't prohibit law enforcement being present for safety and other pieces either. So I think there's, a lot of work still to be done. And like I said, we're all part of that conversation as to what that is going to look like. That is only going to be effective if the mobile crisis is available for immediate response. So if you only have 2 mobile crisis response teams from the whole county, you're not going to be able, that's not going to be practical either. Nothing about that is going to put co-response out of business, so to speak, in my opinion. And that is only my opinion.
And Chair Rodriguez, I wanted to add, you heard ARPA funding mentioned both for county and city in terms of expanding the capacity of the co-response team program. That's not a long-term sustainable source of revenue, right? So those funds have to be spent by the end of fiscal year 25. So that is something for the commission to consider in terms of future advocacy as well as future prioritization and reviewing budgets for both the fire and police department.
And as far as the ambulance contract and that piece of it, I think that remains to be seen. I think that it could be a possibility. I know we've had just some preliminary discussions surrounding that. We don't know what that, I think it's too early to know what that ultimately is going to look like. I don't think that, I wouldn't put a big no on that possibility. We just don't know what that's going to look like yet.
Okay. And is the clinician for co-response, is that strictly something that Be Well oversees, or could the city have its own clinicians?
Technically, I guess the city could have its own clinician. I've seen a couple of cities throughout California actually do that. I mean, in the city I came from, the city, through the police department, actually hired its own caseworker to add that to part of the team, which we contract with CityNet and other folks. So it was a little different model. It doesn't mean that we couldn't do that. I think the hard part about that is because of having access and being part of that network. I think that would be the big kind of stumbling block for that. You could hire a clinician, but having them part of what is the county system and part of that is super important, so they're connected to all those pieces. So that is where, for me, I hesitate to go that route, because I think there's a likelihood of a disconnect that we're not going to be as effective as I would like us to be. For me, I'd like to continue to work with the county to get where we need to go together.
Final question on this topic. What support, do you need support from the commission to have 3 fully staffed teams?
I think what's going to be necessary is, as we move forward and get the second clinician and seeing how effective that is, and start gathering some numbers, is that, as we look at future budgets and that type of thing, when we do budget presentations, then that's when I'll be coming to the commission to, work with us in terms of what we're going to go to the city council with in terms of priorities. So, like I said, for right now, I'd like to have the opportunity to get a second team fully functioning, lean into that, and then look at the future if that third team is necessary or not. I mean, I think it's going to be, but I don't have really enough evidence to really support that at this time.
Thank you. And then moving on to 5150 questions. Does any commissioner have questions specific to that topic?
I have one. So and I may be misunderstanding, but I certainly get the impression that one of the functions of the co-response team is to find alternatives to a 5150 hold back into the, into a less restrictive environment if possible. So what happens to the people that are put under a 5150 if we have only 16 beds in our facility to do that? Do we then
So,
them out to other parts of the state, or how's that work?
so what happens is if an officer places someone on a hold and takes them to Cottage Hospital, they go into the emergency department.
Right.
Where there they have a place to try to stabilize them within the first couple of days. They had a specific unit that does that. So just because someone is placed on a 5150 hold doesn't necessarily mean they will ultimately be transported to a facility. So they may get the need, and in the emergency department and in that particular unit, they may be able to be stabilized. They may be able to get the appropriate medication and be stabilized enough where they don't actually have to go to a facility. So, just because someone is placed on a 5150 facility doesn't mean they're going to need that long-term piece of it.
Okay, so the follow-up to that, and of course, we don't have Cottage here to answer the question, unfortunately, but obviously, that person who is coming in on an emergency is going to be there for a much longer period of time than the average emergency admission. Is there a constraint at Cottage with being able to hold these people?
So they have to do it within their constraints, but they have a specific area, a specific, I don't know what the right terminology would be, but they have a specific unit, I guess is what I think Ron has talked about. It's a specific unit specific for that. So that's part of what they do and determine in their own triage as to what that is going to be. And sometimes, just based on someone's history and everything, they may, arrange to have them transported quicker to a long-term facility or bed, because a lot of times that can end up in a transfer to a facility outside the county.
And Commissioner Hill, I want to clarify too, the 5150 is usually up to 72 hours for the holds. Anything beyond that point has to be agreeable to the patient, right? So extended treatment can be, determined by a doctor, but they have to be willingly accepting that. So that is another challenge that we're experiencing, especially with individuals that are experiencing behavioral health disorders.
Any other questions from commissioners?
So, early on in the presentation, you mentioned volunteers being involved in some of the programs. It was early on.
Sure, yeah. Yes, so we have volunteers that come in as subject matter experts and present on the different training blocks in the CIT
Okay,
training.
so they're the presenters, they're not
Yes, sir.
providers. Okay.
No, sir.
Thanks.
Sure.
How would SBPD having 5150 authority change or affect the co-response response?
Well, it's another tool. That's really what it comes down to. And if someone needs to be placed on a hold, then we're not waiting for a mobile crisis unit to respond. That's the big thing from the county. Those can often have long extended delays, and instead of that, then we're able to provide immediate help and immediately transport. A lot of times when someone is having that mental health crisis, Dr. Lee can speak to this more than I can, but the longer they are sitting and waiting, the more agitated and more that not just agitated in terms of, like aggression, but the more we're actually causing trauma to them. We're not getting them the help that they need. So that authority allows us to get them the help that they need much, much faster. So, like I said, this is a tool in the toolbox. I think there's I think people have an assumption, because I can tell you in my prior agency, there was this assumption that officers use that hold more than clinicians did. And it was actually the opposite. Because, you know, clinicians, when they get there, it's typically at this level. But officers, you know, actually didn't do that. You know, officers, they understand that you're taking and you're placing someone on a hold. And so you're taking their freedoms away. You have to be very specific about that. That's not like there's a form, you're signing, you're declaring, you're making a very specific statement that affects someone's life. So this isn't something that, as an officer, you do quickly, you know, just because you're trying to solve a problem. This is a specific tool for a specific situation. So, you know, I don't think you're going to suddenly see a huge increase in the amount of holds that are written overall. You're going to see a decrease in the amount of time that it takes for someone to get help. And that is the point for me. It's not about writing more holds. You know, our officers are really good about, you know, determining who they call mobile crisis for, and those already. We, you know, especially here in the city of Santa Barbara. You know, I've probably heard at least 4 from today where, you know, someone's having a mental health crisis moment on a corner and, you know, yelling and unless they meet the criteria, we're going to make sure, we're going to do a welfare check and we're going to make sure they're okay, try to de-escalate them a little bit, but that's not going to necessarily result in a hold.
Okay, so we've spent about an hour on this particular agenda item, and it sounds like more to come after January. So perhaps we can put this back on the calendar after January when we know more about the 5150 pilot program.
I'd be happy to come back after we have things in place and give an update.
Okay, great. And then come budget time, so come spring, we can also talk about how the commission can support supporting 3 fully staffed teams. Any other questions from the commission?
Chair Rodriguez, I have a couple of questions for Dr. Lee, just technical more than anything else. So, as I understand it, there's data that is, there's some sort of form, CIT form, that is filled out whenever the sheriff officer determines that there is a mental health crisis. That data is available?
No, that would be specific to the individual. And so the aggregate data may be available, how many referrals, how many cards, but not specific protected health information.
Okay, that makes sense. And the aggregate data is being assembled by the entity that I can I can't remember, who is giving us those great charts.
WellPath, or social finance, yeah.
Right,
So
okay.
we have different referral forms. So in the field, when patrol is navigating a mental health crisis, and let's say there is no co-response team working, or the co-response team is otherwise engaged, we have what we affectionately refer to as yellow cards, or field interview cards, where the patrol deputy can get the information about what is the crisis, is the individual on medication, what is the family members' information, and a brief narrative on the back. And when our co-response teams get in the next day, they review all of these yellow cards, which are essentially referral forms from patrol, and that's how we generate our proactive contacts. That's out in the field. In the jail, when somebody is being arrested and the arresting officer or deputy feels that there's a mental health nexus to the criminal activity, or that person is evidencing suicidal ideation as an example, there's a form that they fill out that is owned and kept by WellPath. And that is the referral form for in custody.
All right, that helps. I think that's my only question. Thank you.
You're welcome.
Do we have public comment on this topic?
Chair
Okay.
Rodriguez, Chair Rodriguez, we have 1 public comment.
It sounds like 2, or it looks like 2.
Pam Flint-Tabo, please approach the podium.
Hi, I'm Pam Flint-Tambo. I live in the county, out in Goleta. For the last more than 2 years, I have worked with the CLUE organization here in Santa Barbara and the League of Women Voters with a work group that we've met on a weekly basis looking at criminal justice issues. I've also have a past history of about 30 years working in behavioral wellness and developmental disabilities. I've been retired a number of years, but And I'm glad to see things have come a long way. I so wish that the CIT training that we saw outlined this evening was available to folks that I worked with in the past. I really encourage you to go as far as you can with this. There's nothing more traumatic to an individual than ending up in jail, even if you have no illnesses. And for people who have behavioral wellness issues, it really is a very, very traumatic becomes part of their lives. So I am pleased to see that the training is available and potentially would be made available to all of the public safety officers. And additional training, of course, for people with clinicians being available too, as much as you can. So that's really all I wanted to say. I'm not here officially for the league, but as an individual, I want you to know it's a good thing, and I hope you're able to find the funds to make it work and make it work well for the city. It seems to be working well in the county, and we follow that along with our criminal justice work group, and we feel very positive about it. So make it happen. Thanks.
Thank you.
Gail Oshenko. Thank you. I'm Gail Oshenko, and I'm also part of this working group with CLUE. And I actually just have two kind of really specific questions that I hope somebody can clarify or answer. You've talked about this stuff. With regard to Nick Welsh's recent article, my understanding from other sources is that comment was based on some departmental regulation at the state level. I'm not even sure what department, but because I'm a recovering lawyer, I would like to read it, and probably you all do too, so maybe we could get that reference. Back a number of months ago, I believe that we were hearing from John Doyle, but I'm not sure, in behavioral wellness. And we were discussing why it's so difficult to staff these co-response teams with clinicians. And my recollection of that is that the clinicians, the mental health practitioners within behavioral wellness do not want to go on co-response teams without an officer. And so the fact that somebody at the state level, including maybe the governor, thinks law enforcement shouldn't be involved is going to make it that much harder to get these teams operating. And so I don't know if anybody here can answer what's going on in behavioral wellness that it makes it so difficult. I mean, I know in mental health it's very hard to hire at all, but this would be an additional problem that I'm hoping you all can address. I guess I just want to say we have discussed 5150s numerous times. We generally support having more, and we definitely support having coverage of co-response from 11 p.m. to 7 in the morning. Even though there aren't many calls, if there's some way to have them there, we'd like to see that. Thanks.
Thank you, Ms. Oshrenko. Was there a gesture to answer that question? I couldn't tell.
Chair Rodriguez, I can follow up. Do you share your email address in your public comment? Yes, I can follow up by email.
Okay, thank you. Thank you so much, officers and clinician, for coming today and for, more importantly, for doing what you do. It sounds like really difficult work, emotionally difficult work, and it's really important work. So thank you so much for your commitment to serving our most vulnerable community members the way you do. Thank you for being here tonight. Thank you, Dr. Lee, for your presentation and for everyone involved in the CIT and co-response teams. And I look forward to attending one of the 8-hour trainings. I'll be hearing from you soon. Ms. Clerk, can we move to item number 7?
Item number 7, Santa Barbara Police Department Mission Strategies Report.
Good evening. It's definitely evening now. I'm going to make this short and sweet to the point. This is our quarterly update. It should actually be quarter 3. I apologize, the dates on that. It is quarter 3, July through September of this year. Next slide. Oh. There you go. Ooh, nice. Excellent. We are seeing a reduction in our violent crimes compared to last year. We're at 22% for this quarter 3 and 21% for property crimes. That's all good news. All of the other statistics are very, very similar to what you have seen in quarter 1 and quarter 2. The most significant change I'd like to point out is the yellow arrow up on our traffic citations. Our traffic citations have gone from about 160 last quarter 3 to 328. And that is due to the significantly great work by our traffic motor officers and some officers that we've set out in focus areas or directed patrols throughout the city where we get a high level of complaints on speeders and other unsafe traffic violations, as well as our traffic investigator actually looks at where we have most of the accidents and the primary collision factors, and then lets those officers know so that we can go out and write citations or warn motorists for those violations so that we can hope to curb some of those traffic collisions. Relationship building, quality of life. We love these slides. One of the pictures is obviously Fiesta, where the Flower Girls all came to the police department, as well as our continued coffee with the cops in various different locations throughout the community. We had 33 unique community contacts or presentations and outreaches during this quarter. And since we're talking about co-response and restorative, there were 247 co-response or restorative call for service or assists by our patrol officers. And there were 6,496 parking citations during this quarter. This is our picture of our 2 newest volunteers in policing, John and Rob, and they just started on patrol within the last 30-ish days or so. Glad to have them. During this quarter, we had that 247 different unique focus areas throughout the city, 26 directed patrols where we send officers out on those directions, and 842 premise checks. And lastly, our response times are still very, very good. We're averaging 5.3 minutes to priority 1, 11 minutes to priority 2, 29 to 3, and 47.6 minutes to priority 4, all under our targets, which are the gray numbers. 283 active case investigations by our detectives, 136 traffic collisions, over 1,000 follow-up investigations, 3,637 reports taken during this quarter, and 16,279 calls for service. And that is it.
Any questions from the commission?
So I got an email from somebody about the situation at Las Positas and State. So I'm just asking what should I do if I get something like that? Send it to Barbara, or I'm assuming other people got it as well?
Commissioners, yes, you're more than welcome to send it my way, and we're happy to respond on behalf of the city team.
Okay.
Yeah.
So that was a public comment email that was sent to the public comment general email that you distributed, and essentially going back to the data about traffic citations. That particular community member requested additional patrol in the San Roque area, specifically around Loretta Plaza.
And we get several of those a week, and we absolutely do look at that. We absolutely do respond, and that's why I'm proud to say that you can see that citations are up. Not that we want to go out and write all these citations, but that is part of the education, engineering, and enforcement side of what we do with traffic and trying to mitigate those traffic collisions and those public safety concerns that people are calling in about.
Thank you. Any other questions from commissioners? Assistant Chief, what is your title?
Yes, that would be correct.
Okay, Assistant Chief Arroyo, would you remind the public what P3 versus P4 calls are? Priority 1 versus priority 4?
Priority 1 versus priority 4.
Or, well, just the different priorities, what constitutes it?
Absolutely. Priority 1 is our highest calls, or highest priority call. Life and death, imminent danger, and we're going to respond with lights and sirens and get there as fast as we possibly can. Our dispatchers are very good at letting us know if they think there's a priority 1 call. They will always err on the side of public safety and respond what we call code 3 with lights and sirens. Oh, that was apropos. Priority 2 are potentially life and death, urgent, emergent, but not an emergency yet. We may respond code 3 to priority 2, although it's usually rarer, but we get there as quickly as we can while obeying all the rules of the road generally. And again, it's dependent upon what the dispatcher hears on the call or what information they get. That can always be reprioritized. We can start responding as a code 2 or priority 2 and then go to a 1 and respond code 3. Priority 3 are our normal calls for service where something's going on, people need the police department, but it's not an urgent, emergent life and death situation, and it's not life and death right now. So those are probably the majority of our calls for service throughout the day. Priority 4 are cold cases. Cold reports, there's no crime in progress, there's no imminent danger, and somebody just needs to provide service from the police department, generally a crime report, or a VIN verification if they got a new car and they need to something that they need a police officer legislatively wide, but it's not a life and death situation.
Great, thank you. And I know we've talked as a commission about having these PowerPoint presentations available online. I think there's like technology prohibitives that are not allowing us to put it on our current city site, but there might be a possible second site to put it on. Can you clarify that?
Chair Rodriguez, so of course our meetings are live streamed, so this data is available per the live streamed videos. We do have a subcategory called staff reports that we can upload the PowerPoint presentations to, and we're also looking to capture each of the trainings that we've had over the last year specific to that topic that can be easily accessed by the public as well. So all of that is in process, and we hope to have that at the first of the year.
Super, thank you. Thank you so much.
Excellent.
Do we have public comment on this item?
Chair Rodriguez, we do not have public comment.
Thank you so much. And Madam Clerk, can we move to item number 8?
Item number 8, Santa Barbara Fire Department incident reporting data.
Good evening, Commission. As you can see, I am not Chief Mills. Brian Fetterman, I'm the Operations Division Chief. Sorry that Chief couldn't be here tonight with you. I'm quickly realizing through these amazing presentations, I'd rather go first next time because this is a tough act to follow. So well done to the police department. Real quick, just a few slides to go over our response times in this last quarter. Kind of to recap, you'll see in quarter 3 our incident response times or turnout times, and for the public as well. Turnout times are not the pants and jacket we wear to a fire, even though that's what they're called. But this is the time that once the dispatchers notify or alert the crews that it takes them to get from the alert to the apparatus and responding. And that's important whether they're in quarters, out of quarters, if it's a medical emergency, what PPE they have to put on, if it's a structure fire, do they have to get fully dressed, a brush fire, et cetera. So in that time, you can see that we're averaging in the 83.28 seconds for across all shifts, and we broke it down. The fire department has 3 separate shifts, and so the pie chart at least just shows that we're pretty consistent across all 3 shifts. So it's a really good thing. The other component in total response time is travel time, and so that's once we say we're en route at the end of the turnout time to driving and arriving on scene within the community, and it's just a tad over 4 minutes throughout the entire community. This is also really consistent throughout the quarters for us, and what's unique about it is the calls vary in their location. So, most fire departments try to strategically place fire stations throughout the community to meet these response times based on road configurations and such. And so, again, I think we're pretty consistent across the board, even though some of the call volumes and types tend to change a little bit. This is just a little bit of a breakdown of our call summary in the quarter. As you can see, and is typical, our rescue or emergency responses are definitely the highest component of what we respond to. But I'll move just more towards the actual numerics. In quarter 3 was a little over 3,000 calls for service. And so we're trending, as I looked at the previous quarters as well as even into 2022, we're very consistent as a department and as a community, which definitely starts to tell a lot of stories, which is good from a data collection standpoint. We're ticking up a little bit from last year, but not a significant amount. And that is all that I have. Not as fancy, but it's getting later, so I keep it brief.
Questions from the commission?
Could you just remind us, A, B, and C, the shifts, what those shifts are?
Yeah, so the fire department staffed 24 hours a day, 7 days a week, and there are 3 shifts that accomplish that. And that's how the calendar breaks out so that we can have even coverage. And so there's 3 different shifts in the fire department, and we call them A shift, B shift, and C shift. I color code them according to what our calendar looks like. In the fire department, we have a calendar for the entire year. In fact, we can even look at 2027 and see what day, who's working on Christmas. It's an algorithm that plays out, so.
The shift isn't by time. I'm trying to understand, like, is there a
Actually,
particular-
yes.
Okay, so that's what I'm asking. What are the times?
Yeah.
What is the A shift time?
Okay, so the shifts begin at 0800, 8 a.m., and they run for 48 hours. So right now, B shift, the blue shift, is on its second 24-hour shift. So tomorrow morning at 0800, they will go off duty, and C shift will come on duty, and they will work 48 hours. And then they will go off, and then A shift will come on.
What, this on? Is this on? What's the duration of time between the shifts? I have 2 questions, but since that follow-up question, I'm just curious about that.
If I understand the question, there's no separation?
I'm sorry, for the respective teams. So when the team who's working beat shift goes off, how much time do they have off? I guess that's my question.
They
Before
have
come back on.
96 hours off.
So that's the 248s, okay.
Correct.
And then, thank you, just want to be clear.
That's okay.
And then, in terms of the instant response, could you explain what good intent is?
Yeah, so that's the National Fire Incident Reporting System that we report to the state categorizes emergency responses from the 100 series to the 900 series. And so, for example, a fire is all the 100 series calls. And to more specific to your good intent would be dispatched and canceled en route, public assist type services. So the non-emergent or code 3 response type calls. So perhaps somebody calls and says, my refrigerator is kind of smoking and malfunctioning a little bit, I'm a little bit concerned. Instead of sending a full fire structure response to their house, we would type that as a service call or a good intent, go out, see if we can minimize the hazard or help the community member.
So then the proverbial get the cat out of the tree would fall under good intent?
That would be correct, yes.
And you did that recently, didn't you? Like within the last year, you saved a cat from a tree?
Yes, yeah.
Oh, from the fire, that's right.
Yes. We try to do whatever we can to help the community, so long as it's safe. Yes.
I received an email from a community member today, and this is usually a question that I would ask anyway. How many of your calls for service are related to the unhoused?
I was anticipating that question. So of the 3,040 in quarter 3, about 402 were what we categorized as the unhoused. That's to the best of our understanding that we can report it. Sometimes if, it's hard to determine if just because somebody's in the street and we're rendering medical aid to them, there's some subjectivity to that. So we try to be very compassionate in that when we log that data.
When do you anticipate the standards of cover study to be reportable?
Hopefully very soon. I think the chief mentioned at the last meeting that we've gone ahead and pushed out to have some of the data reanalyzed, especially coming out of COVID, where we saw a significant dip and a lot of anomalies. And so in order to really have a good sample set, we've asked the consultant to redo the data. Don't expect a lot of changes, but I think it's important that in the gap that the sample set of data that we're really talking about and setting future objectives are relevant to that data as well. Yeah.
Now that we're moving into the winter season, is there anything specific to winter that you prepare for?
All kinds of stuff. So I would encourage the community to keep up on our social media pages where we're running a lot of general preparedness and awareness type things related to the holiday season, such as electrical safety, candles, fireplaces, and et cetera, and especially driving conditions with the wet rains that are coming. And we monitor really closely. This last storm initially, that, for example, that we were looking at, or the one that's approaching, initially looked to be a lot greater. And so we're on daily conference calls with the National Weather Service trying to see what the models are showing, and also communicating with our partners at OEM, as well as our neighboring fire agencies and law enforcement to see what we're looking at, especially with any water flows, et cetera. The hills are different as we move up and down, and so we want to know, not maybe it won't impact Santa Barbara, but will impact our partners, and then does that put an impact on us when we provide aid to them? So we keep in regular communication.
Great, thank you. And I saw that you brought on several new members of your team.
The wildland folks, if you will, that are out doing mitigation.
Did you have new hires recently, or was that promotions?
So we've had some promotions. We did have new hires about 6 months ago, I think. So they're working through their probation time right now and doing very well.
Super.
Yeah.
Any other questions from the commission? Public comment?
Chair Rodriguez, we do not have public comment.
Thank you so much for coming
course.
today.
Thank you.
And your presentation was fancy enough. Yeah. Madam Clerk, can we move to item number
9.
9? Thank you.
Item number 9, Fire and Police Commission Work Plan.
So Chair Rodriguez, this item was continued from our last meeting. This is an opportunity for the commission to provide any additional feedback and comments from edits that were incorporated from our previous conversation. And if the commission so chooses to vote to adopt the work plan for this year and next year.
Are there questions or comments from the commission? I believe that this item was rolled over for discussion on item number 7. Advise the city administrator's office on a public communications and outreach strategy that increases engagement from community members and organizations of the Fire and Police Commission. And I think that there was question on what does that look like? Is it community forums led by the full commission, or small meetings led by several or one commissioner? Or is this something that comes from the administrator's office?
Chair Rodriguez, it really is whatever the commission chooses it to be. So I think there has been conversations among leadership about forming a 2-person work group that would talk about communications strategy and community engagement strategies as it relates to the commission. But it is for the staff to implement. So we would do that in coordination and collaboration with the commission, of course. But for us to work together, both to really increase the presence, engagement, education, information sharing with a variety of community stakeholders, as well as overall our residents and visitors to the city of Santa Barbara. And I think to educate people about the new duties and authorities of the commission, as well as the work of the commission, the opportunity to have public statements on behalf of the commission and how that could be leveraged in a variety of ways, especially for advocacy. from what we covered several months ago about critical incident response and community engagement as it relates to that. So it really is any and all things. But staff to take on the heavy part of the work and for commissions, relationships, stakeholder relationships, networks, ideas, contributions, ways to engage, strategies, platforms to engage, all of that would be in coordination and collaboration with commissioners.
Thank you. And I believe at this point, are we supposed to move to approve the work plan?
That would be great to do because we are working to meet a deadline as required by ordinance. So just to remind the public, because we were a new commission as of this year, newly reconstituted, we are bridging the work plan for both this year as well as next year. This work plan is due before city council and the mayor before March 1st of every year. This is also how we'll assess the work of the oversight system, the model, including my contributions and my role as monitor. So yes, it would be great to have that motion this afternoon, this evening, I should say. Yeah.
Do we have a motion to approve the work plan as presented in the packet today?
I'll make that motion.
Okay,
I'll second it.
great.
Initiating the vote by name, Commissioner Herlinger,
Yes.
Commissioner Hill,
I'll abstain.
Commissioner Jones,
Aye.
Vice Chair Dozer,
Yes.
Chair Rodriguez.
Yes.
Motion passes.
Oh, did we need public comment for that?
We do not have public comment, Chair Rodriguez.
Okay, super. All righty. Then we can move to item number 10 on the agenda, Commission and Staff Communications. This is an opportunity for commissioners to make a comment on actions or events they attended or any other items that are not on today's agenda.
Okay, I'll go because I didn't get to comment last time because it was too late. I had a great ride-along with SVPD. Officer Daniel Gutierrez was awesome. We went lights and siren at about 11 o'clock at night. And really, I was really impressed with his team of how they dealt with the public and how they exercised such incredible compassion and discretion with how they chose to, whether it be arrest or cite someone. And it was just great to be part of that ride-along. And I'm due to go to the fire department ride-along in about 2.5 weeks on a Friday because I was told by Chief Males it would be the most exciting day.
2.5 weeks.
And sorry, Chair Rodriguez, I just wanted to offer, I know it's late, we have a few minutes left in our meeting, but we are concluding our first year, the Fire and Police Commission, under our new duties and authorities as it relates to oversight of law enforcement. So I just open it up to any reflections of the year. And I also just wanted to share my gratitude. I know a lot of this year has been training and orientation requirements that have been met. I'm looking forward to working with the commission to explore, be more creative, be more innovative, increase our community engagement, ideas, topics, all of the issues that are pertinent to our community. But I just really open it up for any reflection on their first year, as our December meeting will be canceled because of the holidays.
It just went by pretty quickly. That's all I have to say.
Well, so this is the last meeting that I will be chair of the Fire and Police Commission. So I just want to say that it has been an honor. I was chair last year when it was the old commission. I was on the Community Formation Commission that drafted the ordinance language recommendations, and then this year I took the responsibility to heart. It was very important to me that we had a really purposeful first year. And so I just thank you all for your collaboration and your friendship, and it's been an honor chairing.
I'd like to just add my appreciation for Barbara Anderson in terms of all that you have done. It's been a very difficult job to educate people who have very little knowledge about some of these areas, and you've gone out of your way to supply the additional information and help at least me understand things when I didn't understand them, because my lawyer's view is often a little narrow. And so I just want to acknowledge that you are carrying on a number of very unique balances in doing all of this, and thank you.
Commissioner Hawley, I really am taken aback. Thank you so much. I appreciate that a lot. And just to see the level of questions today from the first meeting that we had in January and February, I see the commission, that orientation and training requirements that were recommended by the Community Formation Commission, adopted in our ordinance and adopted by Mayor and Council. You can see where the commission has evolved, grown, and like I said, really excited about digging in to a lot more complex topics and being able to engage our community more broadly moving forward. So thank you for that.
I want to thank the fire department and the police department for sharing their knowledge and information with us with fancy PowerPoints, direct PowerPoints. It's been great, I think, not only for us, but for the public, so thank you.
All right, so if there are no objections, this concludes the meeting of the Fire and Police Commission on November 16th at 5:55 p.m.